Welcome to Literary Deep Dives and Discussions with me, Lieske, the author of the Unseen Operative series. So it is just me today, and we have an interesting topic. I say that a lot, honestly. I feel like many of the principles and topics that I have embedded within the Unseen Operative series are very deep and very pertinent to the human condition. So to me, it is fascinating because, human studies is what I'm all about. I'm really trying to build an overall landscape of the human condition throughout this series. And this is just one of those many points that is particularly relevant and prevalent to the time that we live in. It's a rather long passage that I'm going to read that captures this concept, and there'll be a few minor concepts that I talk about alongside it. But I hope that you'll bear with me today as I kind of weave through them and through many papers, because I've taken a lot of notes for the explicit reason that it really matters to articulate this properly, and I don't want to say something that will completely be off-kiltered or unhinged, as they might say. I mean, many people are going to take what I have to say today to be unhinged, but I hope that you'll come in with a clear mind. So to set the stage for the passage that this comes from in the Lattice Scheme, Azure and Detective Granger, they have just officially detained Carmen Laurent, Madame Laurent, whatever you want to call her, and she's been interrogated. She's refused to reveal her cousin Ariane's location, and so for the third time, Azure has attempted to push Detective Granger into allowing her to enter into the dream state again to find Ariane's location per the accord that she made with Holden Wagner. Complicated mess there. If you haven't reached that point in the Lattice Scheme, don't worry. You'll still kind of understand what's going on. So he is kind of reserved about it. They stop and get some sandwiches because they haven't eaten all day, and so this is the conversation that occurs in the car as they're eating said sandwiches. I'm going to read portions of it, stop and discuss, then read some more and stop and discuss. That will be the pattern for today. Detective Granger was the first to speak between mindful bites. My opposition to entertaining this bargain with Wagner is foremost the risk of you being further injured, Prescott, for which I remain directly liable. I understand it may seem to you that your future is constricted by the shutdown of the dream studies to the point where this case appears to be the only matter within your control. However, despite the present obstacles, I assure you such is not the case. He reached for his drink, took a slow sip, swallowed, then continued. I will admit all of us who are aware of the current dream state affairs remain unsettled by what Ariane may or may not attempt. Until now, Dr. Williams' research team has never encountered an individual who wielded such abilities for self-serving and destructive purposes. What she may yet do is entirely beyond us, and the same uncertainty applies to Wagner and his circle. From your continued interactions with him since Ramazi, we can at least ascertain that Wagner possesses knowledge of these matters far exceeding our own. That precisely is the danger. It is never wise to enter into a game when you cannot see the players, even if you possess a vision or a skill that may shape the outcome. He added pointedly, quite literally. Detective Granger, he has his priorities straight. He has a priority of responsibility for safety. Higher officers, they have absolute responsibility for the safety, the health, the well-being of those under their command directly, first and foremost. But the same fundamental responsibility applies to all law enforcement for humankind. That is that they fundamentally have responsibility to serve those within their country legally, to safeguard their lives, their property, to protect against deception, to protect the weak from oppression, and to provide peace against violence and disorder. That is catered specifically to America's law enforcement system, but it holds true throughout many law enforcement systems throughout the world. So why this matters very much is not because Detective Granger is trying to save his own skin so that he is not held liable for her actions or outcome. It's more about Azure as well as the minds that will be impacted that she enters. Let us not forget that Agent Dublin was comatose because of the actions that occurred in his mind from Alma Morales and others entering into his subconscious. So Granger is essentially, he's looking at all of the people in the picture, everybody at once who could be affected. And Azure kind of is too, although she is in a different way. So we will read her take. Azure brushed a crumb from her lap and responded evenly. We continue to return to this subject of risk. Yes, it is risky, and yes, it is uncertain. That has not changed in the past 24 hours, nor will it. Nevertheless, Wagner has done nothing against us. Questionable though his group has been regarding Hastings' removal, that action has benefited us. With Ariane's threat looming, relying on Wagner is no riskier than remaining idle. We are obligated to ensure that she does not harm the minds or affairs of others in the Bureau, especially Alma. That alone is reason enough to act. She also is seeing the bigger picture. She's seeing all the individuals involved, and of course she's seeing Alma because this whole debacle has framed her former mentor as a murderer, which technically is true, but also as a conspirer with Carmen Laurent. I want you to kind of hold those two tensions, those two perspectives together, because they're both viewing the same audience, the same potential, just very slightly differently, and that's what's causing the difference of opinion here. Both are valid opinions. Here is Detective Granger's response to Azur's response. Granger leaned back, tapping his index finger lightly on the steering wheel. Even so, I fear that you oversimplify the matter. To take that approach would mean linking her directly to our original case, in which the Italians want both their agent returned and any evidence tied to his investigations. Granted, from our dream state interventions, we know Ariane had a significant involvement in his disappearance and in the matters he was investigating. However, dream state aside, the only connections we can demonstrate are her past association with Ramazi, her ties to Hastings, and her familial relation to Laurent, Alessio Scigliano, and Isabel. On that basis alone, she stands connected to the case only as an accessory. Beyond that, our evidence relies entirely on eyewitness testimony. Isabel's primarily, Ramazi's as his memory returns, Laurent's if she chooses to cooperate, and likewise Haji. Yet among them, only Laurent, now in custody, can be corroborated as the orchestrator of the scheme, not Ariane. He earnestly continued, now, they may testify to her involvement through dream entry, but therein lies an entirely different problem. If they speak only of Ariane's ability, they will not be believed. However, if they provide fuller testimony, they cannot do so without revealing our own use of dream agents, which alone risks reigniting the tension surrounding the European dream trials, if not provoking global unrest, particularly towards America. In the present state of world affairs, that would be profoundly unwise. Thus, our aim must be to keep all dream state activity out of the matter. Despite its connections to Ramazi's original investigations, Laurent's current silence thus works in our favor. Ramazi has agreed to keep the matter suppressed so long as his original files remain unfound, and with the charges brought against Isabel, little of what she may say could be taken as credible. Therefore, regarding Ariane's location, it is not necessary or even advisable within the scope of the Ramazi case for me to seek her out, given that we have no tangible evidence she is even within the country, he lightly concluded. Now, in the matter of Mahomes as well, there has been no observed interaction linking her to Hastings or Morales. We have only Hastings' word, which itself rests upon your own. As it stands, the evidence recovered from Hastings points to him as the sole corroborator of the Mahomes disappearance. On these matters, then, the question becomes how much information we truly obtain, how we obtain it, and ultimately what of it is appropriate to disclose. Azure inclined her head in agreement. That is the crux of it, Prescott. If we keep her apart from the Laurent and Ramazi cases, we hold no justifiable grounds based on hard evidence to pursue her. Should we encounter her by other means, we would be hard-pressed to find justifiable cause to detain her. It is not a question of whether she poses a danger, she undoubtedly does, but whether we have authority and evidence to act upon it. Number one is oversimplification. This is a common human tendency. We can call it the emotional response versus the logic response. You know, in therapy, they call it the emotional mind versus the wise mind. There's all sorts of variations of it out there, and emotions, they're powerful. I've touched on them in several podcasts before, usually under the perspective that our thoughts influence our perspectives, influences our emotions, influences our actions. However, that model can kind of be jumbled or rearranged differently so that our emotions stimulate our thoughts that influence our perception and therefore our actions. So why and what in any of those models is happening? First, we need a basic understanding of what emotions actually are at their basic level. And that is that emotions are physiological sensations of the body that occur in the mind when stimulated by certain neurotransmitters. If you're like, what? Here's a little mini science lesson. I love science, don't you? Neurotransmitters are literally little chemical messengers produced throughout our body by different organs. They're also called hormones. So neurotransmitters, chemical messengers, hormones, they are the same thing. It is the endocrine system of your body. So, for example, in the brain, in the hypothalamus, you can produce norepinephrine. This is wakefulness, arousal. It's what gets you up in the morning. Adrenal glands. Who hasn't heard of adrenaline? That is norepinephrine and epinephrine, which triggers our fight or flight response. We also have other neurotransmitters like dopamine, which, you know, is exciting and super fascinating, and it's also addicting. There are ones like serotonin, mood stability. body. Oxytocin, which is your safe, feel good, well-being, safety. Endorphins, which decrease your pain. And then of course, GABA or GABA, which calms the brain, preventing you from overexcitement. These get released for a myriad of reasons. Generally, it's situational or stimulus based, as in, someone or something touches you, scares you, you perceive pressure, pain, sudden touch, attention, etc. They just release. They can also release because of hormonal changes in the body as natural processes. They can be released because of food. There is a myriad of reasons. It can get very complicated, but that's just the basic science lesson here. So we know that these neurotransmitters, they cause emotions, and emotions are powerful because as humans, emotions really mess with that perception in that model like we talked about. We have a natural inclination that when emotions hit us, to think in certain ways and then to act on them in certain ways. And often, yes, these things are learned behaviors, but even so, it's just how it is on a basic level. These tend to be emotional responses. They feel out of our control, but we know that they're not all completely out of our control. Because even though we can't prevent neurotransmitter release per se, we can at least control our thoughts, our behaviors, and our actions when those emotions arise. Therapy, coaching, self-mastery, even in health coaching, we talk about, refuting negative thoughts, thinking more positively, having control within ourselves, self-mastery. And we know on a basic level without those things that we are able to control our thoughts, because I would never go and smack talk my employer the same way that I probably talk smack to my best friend in private. Why? Because, we can push our emotions down enough, since job equals money equals life quality equals survival. We determine that those matters are far more important than acting on our temporary emotions. But we kind of suck at keeping that control when certain emotions strike frequently enough and powerfully enough. For example, take fear, guilt and shame, sexual arousal, excitement, exhaustion, hunger, getting hangry, anger and exhaustion. I guess I said exhaustion there twice. Now, there may be a side note that many of us handle emotions better or worse than others, and sometimes in different situations we do better or worse than even ourselves. So I want us to keep in mind that there is that difference, but then there's also emotional and mental disorders, which are often an overabundance, an imbalance, an inadequacy, or an improper reception or production of neurotransmitters. So they cause all sorts of emotional imbalances. That is not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a general, healthy, regular functioning mind. Struggles already with these emotions. So that is just a side note for FYI. Keep it in your mind, lock it in your brain, but know that that is not fully applicable to this entire conversation directly. Note over. So our convictions, our ideas, they tend to control our perceptions along with our interpretations of these emotions. And if we act on these emotions without any greater thought, it can be a world of trouble. Because too much emotion blocks out our ability to perceive vital details. For example, let's say somebody breaks into your house, middle of the night. Fear overpowers you the moment that you realize, and where is your focus? It's on that intruder. Where is their location? Where is your location? You're all about your spatial awareness. Where is the quickest way out? Where is my phone? I gotta call the police. I've got to survive. Those are the things that you are hyperfixated on. Fight or flight. It's all survival. What you don't notice is that the intruder's gun is a Nerf gun, that their voice is your neighbor's, that they're wearing purple shoes, that your son Billy never made it home last night because he's staying out late with friends. So he's already technically safe. But on a more common scale, let's say an attractive person also finds you attractive. Dopamine rush. You feel good when they're around you. You feel good when they touch you. Find maybe that their romantic forcefulness is highly attractive and stimulating. And maybe you kind of give in and, things happen, things escalate, and being around them or being with them or letting them do whatever is like cloud nine for you. You have all that dopamine in you. It feels so good to be loved, to be wanted, all of that. Feels great. But then the dopamine comes off. In order to get back that high, you have to keep re-engaging them again and again and again. That's not necessarily a problem if you're just looking at it on a flat base level, like whatever. But there is a potential for a problem if all that is happening there is emotional arousal. And maybe let's say what you're not seeing because of that constant need for the emotional arousal is how changed your life has become. That you've given up certain hobbies and interests that you used to have, that you no longer spend as much time with family or friends like you used to, that you have to constantly rearrange the ordinary just to be getting that same high. Now, of course, sacrifices need to happen in relationships, but maybe these are really meaningful things for you. And suggestion here, maybe relationships are most healthy when there's support in living your best life rather than sacrificing it all. So, things get minimized, and that is how people tend to get stuck in toxic and abusive relationships. And I bring this up not because physical attraction is bad, but because too often it's portrayed as the highest standard of romance. But it is the number one contributor to misinformation spread about relationships and what a healthy relationship looks like. Therefore, it is a contributor to the ever-increasing rates of domestic violence and intimate partner violence, both of which continue to escalate in this country. Now, this is no matter what your sexual orientation, identification is. If a relationship is solely based off of the emotional arousal you get from intercourse or anything else that is just purely physically based, there is a heavy risk, and this is researched heavily as well in human and relationship studies, that there are outcomes with high depression, suicidal ideation, unstable relationships, and yes, STDs. So, sexual attraction, it is not the proper standard or indicator of love. It's not the most reliable indicator of love. So that is my little soapbox on that. It is important. Now, that's not the point of this episode. The point is that emotional thinking obscures our judgment very easily when we let it control our actions too frequently. Let's say, authors, because I'm an author and I engage with the author community a lot. Let's say you have an idea for a book or a writing, or the most recent one I've seen is there is a ton of political anger. And so you want to write about it. You want to get it out of you. You want to get a message out into the world. That's not bad. It's not bad to have those passions. In fact, those convictions are necessary to creating a story. But let's say you either love this idea so much or you feel so passionately about it that it needs to be out now that you just write it down, quick edit, publish, shoot it straight out. And that's a problem. Why is that a problem? Because then you may realize, or you may not realize, but you've sabotaged your own either profitability, marketability, or argument because it was published too soon before it was complete, before it was polished, before it was finished, before it was fixed. That is an emotional response. But also, let's say, somebody calls you a name and now life sucks. Let's forget all the other good things that happen or the good things people say about you because that just hurts so much. Let's say you keep doing poor in school, but it's okay because I got my drug friends out there. That's an emotional addictive response. Somebody cuts you off in the middle of the road. They are now the spawn of Satan. If you see a police drag out your neighbor violently, that obviously is going to stir something in you, especially if you think they're a good person. Never mind that there may be a chance that they are involved in human trafficking. We never see the full picture when we let our emotions rule. When I feel down, I perceive negative, and therefore the world is negative. When I feel positive or rosy or happy or high, so is the world. That is just how it is. So Azure's emotions of panic geared towards the prevention of people getting hurt is oversimplifying what considerations need to be foremost held and examined, which Granger lists, which is number one. They cannot look for Ariane on grounds of the Ramazi case. They can't do it either on the Laurent case, nor can they do it on the Mahomes case. Those are the three cases that they are literally working with. Can they go after her? That is our question in just a second, because there was one vital paragraph that I ended with that I'm just going to repeat for the sake of the biggest point of this episode, which is this. He said, "It is not a question of whether she poses a danger. She undoubtedly does. But whether we have the authority and the evidence act upon it." Did you catch it there? The biggest part of this episode is to do the right thing for the right reason with the proper or right authority. I'll let that sink in just for a second there. You do the right thing for the right reason with the right scope or authority. So that is the latter part of that. The right scope, the right authority is critically important because too often we oversimplify doing the right thing for the right reason and land ourselves in serious ethical, moral, or emotional trouble. So back to the formal example. I love this person so much. So intimacy right now is right. No, that is way too oversimplified, especially if it puts somebody's job on the line, or if that person is married to another person, or if you're underage, or, maybe you don't know enough about them to know whether or not they have an STD. There's all sorts of things. Or better yet, okay, let's say I stay in this household with this person, listen to what they say. I'll just keep quiet, get along, keep the harmony, keep the peace. Let's stay together for the children's sake. That is how you also keep trauma and abusive relationships going. And as we talked about in our very, very first episode on this channel, that is like having a thorn shoved in you that you just keep twisting and let fester instead of pulling it out. It does no good to keep the pains going, to keep the peace instead of starting the healing by taking that out, given that, yes, it will cause a little bit of initial pain. An even more realistic, grounded example on the everyday basis, the generalized, is let's say that I know a certain treatment or nutrition plan that could really help somebody. Let's say that I'm very versed in nutrition, which is true, I actually am. I have a degree in it and I also have a certification for it. Let's say that a client is sitting in front of me and they're describing their condition and I just know that what they're describing fits with a need for higher B6, ashwagandha, vitamin D, vitamin E, Let's say that I recommend that they take it, and they do because they trust me, right? And let's say because they took a ton of it because I suggested it, they end up with toxicity, liver damage, kidney failure. It's not just my license on the line or me getting sued at that point. It's that they have irreversible damage now in their body because of my helpful suggestion. And we do that a lot. We think because, I know this thing because it's worked for me or it generally works across the board, that therefore I should recommend it. I have no right to keep good information from others, right? And to a point, yeah, but what it comes down to is the full scope of accountability. See, anytime I let out information that others might act upon, I am accountable as well for that outcome because I was involved in sharing it with them. Point being that therefore there must be a high responsibility placed that we are in fact acting in the right scope and authority to be doing the right thing for the right reason. So you see, it's part of an equation or just like a little bullet point grid, if you will. Number one is that what is the right thing to do? Number two, what is the right reason to do it? And number three, am I the right person to be doing it? If you aren't number three, if you're not the right person to be doing it, then number one, the right thing to do changes. Yes, it is the right thing for me to want this person to have good information, but I'm not the right person to prescribe anything to them. I do not have that authority. Therefore, the right thing for me to do is not to share the information with them, but to refer them to the proper person to do so. You see how that changed? Because I was not the right person, my action, the right thing for me to do, was different. So generally speaking, the right reason for somebody to be doing something doesn't really switch as much as being the right person to do it, doing what the actual action is. So, for example, it is the right reason to enforce the law because you want to keep people safe. Justice must prevail, the welfare of the nation, keeping those from breaking the law responsible. However, what the right action is depends on whether or not you are in authority to act on that, whether or not you are authorized under that authority to do that thing. Politics weigh really heavily on number one and number three, heavily all the time. But for the matter of number two, what the right reason to do it is, that is generally more of a moral dilemma. And more frequently, it's fought on like micro and social levels than politics. For example, what is the right reason for an abortion? Sticky topic there already, right? But that goes into your moral philosophies of when does life begin? Save my life or the baby's? What is the circumstance? Moral dilemma. It can also be like a religious argument. Why keep commandments? Is it because God said to do so, or is it because I actually derive some benefit from it? Doctor example. Am I taking this medication or trying to change my lifestyle to exercise more, to eat less sugar because my doctor has told me that it will significantly improve my blood glucose levels? Or is it because, I actually want to be healthy and stick around for my kids? There's a lot of or in there, a lot of either or, right? But I need to always present there's also the both and. Maybe my moral reason for doing these things is both because somebody in authority has told me to do so and I trust them, and I want the benefits for me. It can be both and, either or, whichever. We limit ourselves so much when we think in extremist thinking, kind of like, the only reason I should exercise is because I know it's good for me. Doesn't usually last long. And that's the thing about it, is your moral reason for wanting to do something, if it hinges solely on the basis of because somebody told me so, it usually isn't as lasting or powerful enough to actually produce a long-winded action. Whereas if you have a bold case scenario that somebody told me it was good, I trust them and I want this for me, it's going to last a lot longer, or at least you'll attempt it with greater intensity, greater motivation, greater effort than you otherwise would. So that's just something to throw in there. Case point being, the right reason to do something is going to be up to your moral code. While I was thinking along those lines of writing that chapter, as well as this podcast, I was reminded a quote from everybody's favorite, Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl. There comes a point in time where William Turner is hanging from a mast. Jack has literally shifted the boat so that he's caught on a mast. He's hanging off of it, kind of. It started because of an argument, you know, the classic scene where your father is a pirate and no, that's not true. Kind of like, you know, Star Wars. I'm your father. That's a lie. Quoting movies now. But here's the quote. He says, "Now, as long as you're just hanging there, pay attention. The only rules that really matter are these: what a man can do and what a man can't do. For instance, you can't accept that your father was a pirate and a good man, or you can't. But pirate is in your blood, boy, so you'll have to square with that someday. And me, for example, I can let you drown, but I can't bring the ship into Tortuga all by me onesies, savvy? So can you sail under the command of a pirate? Or can you not?" You see, that is a statement of a moral dilemma rather than an actual behavior possibility. Yes, Jack acknowledges that he has the capacity and moral capability to both save Will and let Will drown. There's two different things there. In reality, there are limits as to what both can and cannot do physically versus morally. What is in your scope of morals, which is what you can and cannot do, what you will and will not do, is a better way to articulate it. Morals will determine if it is the right reason for you to act at all. Scope will determine if you are the right person to do it. So for example, Jack and Will, they both want to get to the Ile de Muerte. Will has a moral obligation within himself to save Elizabeth. Jack has an odd form of obligation to keep his word, mostly to himself, to get his ship back, which involves helping get Elizabeth back. So the scope, though, is that neither of them can possibly drive the boat alone. So what isn't in your power to control or determine would be that thing. How does that then apply to the Lattice Scheme? Let's see how they figure out their situation with the right scope, the right authority, and the right reason to do something. Obviously, they have a right reason, right? This is how it goes. Azure blinked, chewing slowly, then says, "What about her attacks on a bureau agent?" This argument, Granger acknowledged, "Your injuries are by no means insignificant. Given that we possess a recording of the incident and the wounds remain, we are legally obligated to pursue her for the offense of assault. Those are the only grounds upon which we can presently search for her." Azure's gaze fixed on him. "So your only opposition then is my being re-injured. If you are taken out, we lose our leverage that we now hold. That is my primary concern, Prescott. Yet that, along with the critical need for ethical grounds before entering any location to discover her, is not the ultimate point of my deliberation." "Then you were planning to proceed with the arrangement?" "Yes, after receiving approval from Monroe," who was his head, "of course, which permission I have obtained. These matters cannot be executed spontaneously, Prescott, especially with the impact they may have on our remaining cases and international relations." So that would appear to be their solution, yes. They justify the action on a minor case. Now, it's not that injuries are less important than the rest, but in politics or in the justice system, there are certain priorities to cases, and an agent being injured isn't as much of a priority as preventing several people's lives from being injured. You see the difference there? If you don't, we can discuss it. But yeah, they're going to justify that. Now, there is the technicality question, can they do that? Obviously, Granger has reported it to Monroe, but because the injury itself occurred in the subconscious dream state and they can't use that as a justifiable piece of evidence, how does that pan out? Well, I kind of touch on this at the end of the book when Alma and Azure are discussing the different excuses, or rather medical labels, that are given to their dream-induced injuries. For example, Ariane dies by tapeworms. Yeah, so just if you haven't gotten to that part, get to that part and you'll understand how it's justified a little bit later. So the point being, can they do this? Yes. That is a legal reason that they can do it. That dictates that their action, more than their awareness, because obviously they're aware that Ariane is a danger and something has to be done. They can now act on it, but they found the proper way to act on it and they have the proper authority to do that ethically now. So that is their scope. Our collective sworn duty to uphold the law trumps our personal preference to practice it. Little alliteration there. I'll repeat that just for your sake. Our collective sworn duty as citizens as law enforcers to uphold the law trumps our personal preference to practice it. No one has the right to break the law. That a man cannot do. There are legal consequences to that we have all sworn to, whether or not we agree with them. It is the law. For those that we do not agree with, there are literally in our society built-in things that we can do about it. There's a reason that we have politicians that we pick by representation. There's a reason there are nonprofits, there are reform bills, there are lawyers, legislation, all of those things, and above all, voting. And yes, there is the argument that our votes don't do much, but having lived in other nations, I can say our votes do a heck of a lot more here than they do around the globe. End of that line. So let's look at a little bit more of our interpersonal life. I have a moral standard to be honest. By that standard, I therefore do not have a right to lie. I cannot lie. Like Jack would say, that I cannot do. I can tell the truth. I cannot lie. So when, let's say, Loretta asks me if I absolutely love this dress that she bought, which is absolutely hideous in every way that is conceivable, what can I do? What is the right reason to do it? Am I the person to do it? By my standard that I cannot lie, I cannot tell her that it looks great or even good or even decent, because it really doesn't. Does that mean that I tell her then that it's awful? And am I the person to tell her that? If Loretta and I are close and she trusts my good opinion, then yes, I have that scope to be able to say that, right? That could be a good reason to also say it is because I care about her enough to tell her honestly that this dress is not something you actually want to be wearing. You know, we could argue that there are good, better, best responses in this case scenario, but that's not really what we're getting at here. We're just getting at whether or not I'm the right person to do something, what that thing to do is, and the right reason to do it. So let's say me and Loretta are not close friends at all. Let's say that Loretta is very temperamental, or let's say that she has an emotional behavioral disorder. Let's say that I am very acutely aware that if I tell her the honest truth that that dress does not look good, it is highly likely to trigger a bad reaction. Am I therefore the right person to say it? No, I'm not. You know, a trusted caregiver, a trusted friend, somebody who knows how to really navigate the situation well, they would be the right person to do it. It's not me. Then what is the right thing for me to do? Because she's asking me and she wants an answer, right? Like, time is ticking. For me, I would tell her that I can see that she is very excited. I could ask her, tell me, what do you like about this dress? And just have that moment for her to be excited. That's not me lying, because honestly, I care about her. You can argue all you want about, well, it's a white lie because you're withholding the truth, but am I? Am I withholding the truth? Because I'm pretty sure that my opinion isn't necessarily true to her. It might not be true to somebody else, right? That's just a little nuance to think about there, that just because you have an opinion and it's true to you doesn't necessarily mean that is a truth across the board that you should share. Therefore, is it really a white lie to hold it back? Heavy debate there. These are the things that keep me up at night, right? But I can also refer her to the person that she trusts more to give their honest opinion if she comes right back asking my opinion of it. I can honestly say, I don't think that I should tell you what I think about it, because I think what matters more is what you think about it. There's all sorts of things that you could say, etc. So there's minor everyday things like that, from, you know, somebody breaking some hard news or good news to you, to difficult conversations, delegation, etc. On the big scale, again, law enforcement and all the nasty topics that I have already brought up that are stirring emotions, I have no doubt. I guess the point is that as much as we love and care about others, we need to be mindful of our scope to address these things. You know, teachers are not parents, for example. Another controversial issue. We don't have the right to blame teachers for failing to prepare our kids to be stable adults in society if the only things they're obligated to teach by law is STEM. I don't know about you, but STEM did not prepare me for taxes. You know, there's all sorts of things like that. As well as, you know, teachers legally cannot support students' sexual transition behind parents' backs. Why? Because they are not in that scope of practice medically or personally. That is just how it is. And yes, you can say, well, what if that person at home is being abused, or what if they feel unsafe, and what if this and that? And there are literally built-in safeguards for that. There are advisors for that. There are so many things to get around that. Ultimately, the what if scenarios, those are not the majority cases. In fact, they're far more rare than we like to give them thought to. And it is critically important to provide for those rare cases. It's true. Again, because 90% of the time, the what if scenario does not occur. What happens if we let those exceptions dictate the majority of functions that are supposed to happen? What if we let that emotional response in us overtake the logical response, overtake all the other considerations? It does more harm than perceived good for everybody. And that is just reality, whether you want to emotionally accept it or not. You have to acknowledge the logics along with the emotions. We like to obscure things that we don't like to see, which things are general consequences. The fact is that we live in a world of billions and billions of people. With billions and billions of people, there is no one size fits all. The best we can literally do is find a majority case scenario that serves the greatest good of all the people and then address those minorities. Because if we do it opposite, if we address the minorities instead of the majority, then it's the same as like a scenario of a river. If there is a really rapid river and people keep falling into this river, if we spend our time trying to save every little person out of the river instead of immediately stopping more people from falling in and rescuing them, there's a problem. There is a way we can do both, but the problem is foremost solved when we stop people from falling in and then address rescuing the few that fall in thereafter. It's about saving the majority of lives. Yes, we want to save everyone, but being human, it is unrealistic to say that we can't. I'm not trying to say this to be mean, and it's not because I don't care. I really do care. I've been in the minority case many, many times, but I am very, very grateful for those safeguards that keep the majority safe so that those extra created things, those extra created supports and bills and nonprofits are able to help me in my scenario, which is an exception. So yeah, now I know that I'm speaking a lot about emotional mind and logical mind as if the emotional mind is really, really, really bad. And it's not. Emotions are wonderful and beautiful. Me and my husband have touched on them several times in our Mere Christianity podcast. They're parts of us and they're important. Emotions can tell you when something is off, when something is good. And we need these identifiers so that if there is something wrong or we're in danger, we can address it as quickly as possible. Emotions are important, and so is the logic. The point is that we need a balance of both. And that takes some serious, healthy recognition of what healthy emotions are, what healthy logic is, what is groundly based on both. Because, there are those cases where your emotions might not be stable and you might need a little help identifying that. But if you take that time to really understand those things and have a perfect balance, and by perfect, I mean perfect attempt at balancing them because nobody's perfect. But if you're trying to balance them properly instead of getting into the heat of things so frequently, the majority of the time, things will go better. Not just for you, but for others around you. So there is my soapbox on that. Do the right things for the right reasons with the right scope and authority. So, does this end or conclude our podcast? No, there is one or two more points to be made that I think are very important, especially if feelings have been stirred up to this point in this podcast. I think that this will be very helpful, not to gear you towards any specific perspective, but just for yourself. I see, says Azure. She bites into her sandwich again, somewhat peeved at the game he appeared to be playing. What then is your ultimatum? Granger glanced sideways at her, his tone dry. Critical thinking, clarity, and communication, Prescott. Your eagerness to act, while refreshing, can also become overly excitable to the point that you risk missing the subtle but important elements. Insight from Laurent, for example, or even these sandwiches. Life is not a film noir where every moment presses forward without pause until the ending. Breaks are essential, even while resources advance the operation. These pauses allow us to articulate matters with precision, to consider that which we do not know, and to realign as a team regarding what we do know, rather than charging ahead on the strength of an assumption. Particularly in cases such as this, where multiple affairs interweave, one must be certain of the cause that justifies an action, rather than conflating separate matters. He unwrapped his sandwich, giving it an odd look as if debating whether he should eat it, all while still speaking out. We may be fortunate enough that Wagner's group intends to act with integrity during this round. Nevertheless, we must remain acutely aware that we are, as of now, operating entirely outside our framework. Without serious regard for that, we risk being blindsided later. Ending this ordeal is not only about resolving our present cases, it's about preventing the perpetuation of such violations by any individual or group in the future. Setting the sandwich down again, he turned to meet her eye. Every possible end must be assessed, even if many of them fall through or prove meritless in our final casework. Do you follow? So critical thinking, clarity, and communication. When we perceive something when we perceive that something is wrong or stressful, that something must be done, that is our fight or flight emotional response, our need for control. And our tendency at those times is essentially to speed up, to hyper speed up. And that reminded me, in writing that, I was thinking very poignantly of a talk once gave by a man called Dieter F. Uchtdorf. And he used to be an Air Force pilot. And so this is something that he said that is so beneficial in all aspects of life. He says, "What do you suppose pilots do when they encounter turbulence? A student pilot may think that increasing speed is a good strategy because it will get them through the turbulence faster, but that may be the wrong thing to do. Professional pilots understand that there is an optimum turbulence penetration speed that will minimize the negative effects of turbulence, and most of the time that would mean to reduce your speed. The same principle applies also to speed bumps on the road. Therefore, it is good advice to slow down a little, steady the course, and focus on the essentials when experiencing adverse conditions. This is a simple but critical lesson to learn. It may seem logical when put in terms of turbulence, but it is surprising how easy it is to ignore this lesson when it comes to applying these principles to our daily lives. When stress levels rise, when distress appears, or when tragedy strikes, too often we attempt to keep the same frantic pace or even accelerate, thinking that somehow the more rushed our pace, the better off we will be. One of the characteristics of modern life seems to be that we're moving at an ever-increasing speed, regardless of turbulence or obstacles. Let's be honest, it is rather easy to be busy. We can all think of a list of tasks that will overwhelm our schedules. Some might even think that our self-worth depends on the length of their to-do lists. They flood the open spaces of their time with lists of meetings and minutiae, even during times of stress and fatigue. Because they unnecessarily complicate their lives, they often feel increased frustration, diminished joy, and too little sense of meaning in their lives. It is said that any virtue, when taken to an extreme, can become a vice. Overscheduling our days would certainly qualify for this. There comes a point where milestones can become millstones and ambitions albatrosses around our necks. What then is the solution? The wise understand and apply the lessons of the tree rings and the turbulence. They resist the temptation to get caught up in the frantic rush of everyday life. They follow the advice that there is more to life than increasing its speed. In short, they focus on the things that matter most. That is the final point of this podcast episode. When you know what matters most, your purpose, it will align your priorities for you. And this decreases stress. It decreases the dilemma. It decreases the trauma. It decreases so much anxiety, even as he was talking about. So what are the things that matter most? Just give you a minute there to think about that. If you just thought of a string of one-word answers just quickly, I'd like you to kind of stop and answer this question. Why? See, what makes those things a priority? Why are they a priority? Oversimplifying these responses, whether logical and emotional, one or the other, it loses the power and direction of that thing. If we stop and we perceive the depth and the meaning of what matters most to us, the why, the heart of it, we're going to find a couple of really fundamental, critical things. Number one is that the things that matter most are never temporary. They last a lifetime, whether by your belief or longer. So for example, we really do need to take a long view. Why? Because a lasting commitment is so much more powerful than temporary matters. And the commitment to that thing ultimately result in a purposeful, driven, functional life. It's not just the motivation, it's the commitment, it's the longevity, it's the purpose. It fuels us. We also will come to realize that the things that matter most have a widespread or profound impact outside of ourselves, generally for the good, and they're not selfish. So as you think about the things that matter most to you, I think you're going to find that the things that matter most live in those two camps. So yes, there are important things like survival, quality of life, family, heart, etc. But the depth of it, why does family matter? Why does family matter? Because family lasts. And I'm not just saying your birth family, because sometimes family isn't your birth family. But true family is family that sticks together and lasts through the thick and the thin, right? That is a long duration. It's not temporary. And it matters outside of yourself because these are individuals that are bringing something to you and that you are giving something back. It's a bi-directional exchange that is just beautiful. That's why I love studying family or human family systems. That was a huge reason for the major that I chose for my bachelor's studies. So it isn't about priorities, it's about meaning and purpose. And then again, like I said, that purpose drives your priorities, your proper priority order. It will decrease the stress. It will decrease the anxiety if you slow down and hold on to those things that matter most. Because by slowing down to reconnect, we are limiting our own suffering, our own anguish and difficulties that happen to just elevate as we push for more, as we try to go so much faster than we ought to do, as we neglect taking time, like Granger said, to sit back, to reconnect, reprocess things, and to look at all the angles. It does more good to slow down and reconfigure ourselves than to break forward and bust ourselves. I think everybody can agree with that ultimately. So yes, slow down, think critically, think long-term, seek clarity, communicate well with yourself and with others. There's a saying that I used to say to myself a lot that I need to say a heck of a lot more, and that is just 4 words: stop, breathe, then proceed. It even rhymes. How fun is that? Well, it kind of rhymes. So yes, that is the wrap on our podcast today. I hope that it was beneficial for offering a new and meaningful perspective. I know that there were several controversial topics discussed in this podcast, but it isn't the topics themselves that I'm trying to make a point about. I'm not trying to say you need to lean Democrat, you need to lean Republican, be conservative, be progressive. Like, that is not the point here. If that's all you got out of it, I hope that you will go back, re-listen, and reconsider, because what really matters is the core principles. These principles don't change off of politics. They really don't. They are lasting, true things that you can observe throughout many societies and generations. And that is, again, emotional and logical minds needing a balance, that we do tend to oversimplify things when we ought to balance the two, that we need to do the right thing for the right reason, but we also need to be the right person. And likewise, we need to be sure that when people give us, feedback, advice, etc., that they are the right person and that they're doing it for the right reason. We have that power within us and we are accountable. As I've spoken about in many, many podcasts ago, we are accountable for what we choose to, what we allow to impact us as much as we can and what we put out to others. And the greatest good that we can do to society, the least selfish thing that we can do, is to ensure that we are acting properly within our scopes because of the right reasons, because of care for others, because of dignity and integrity and compassion and humanity. That is the take for today. I hope to hear any comments on your opinions, your life experience with these things, where these principles matter, where they might not. I am more than happy to take negative feedback as well, because feedback is good. It helps me grow. I hope that you will subscribe to this channel. And if you haven't checked out a copy of the Lattice Scheme, please do. It will be on sale. The ebook is going to drop down to 99 cents. So this is all in preparation for book 2, which title I am shortly going to reveal and not on this podcast. So I'll see you next time.